Um, okay, so I wanted to present today. I'm going to share my screen with you, but that means I won't be able to see you. So my name, as I said before, is Elizabeth Griffiths. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers University School of Criminal Justice. And today I'm presenting on some preliminary analyses from a project supported this year by the New Jersey Gun Violence Research Center. This work is in collaboration with Dr. Jie Xu, and we would like to acknowledge, of course, the research assistance of Sandy Xie. Our presentation is titled Ghost Gun Stores and the Concentration of Shootings. But I want to be clear at the outset that this paper is not about ghost guns. So if that's why you're here, I apologize. You're going to see soon how we sort of colloquially use the term ghost in this study. So as all of you know, concerns over gun violence have risen in recent years, signaling a really marked shift in our ability both to study gun violence, but also to propose workable, empirically based solutions. And in years past, it was extraordinarily difficult to study gun violence because of the sort of potential political ramifications and the rights-based ideological conflicts that would ensue. But rising numbers of persons killed in gun-related deaths and, of course, in mass shootings with high-powered assault rifles have brought this issue really to the fore. So this is a really important organization doing exciting work. In 2021, more Americans died of gun-related injuries than in any other year on record, and that represented a 23% increase in the number of gun deaths in just a 2-year window. And while the rate of gun violence has not reached the levels that it was in the 1990s, at 14.6 gun deaths per 100,000 people, we're getting dangerously close. Under President Biden's administration, public policy has shifted in an attempt to stem the tide of gun violence sweeping the nation. But it's really important to consider that gun violence does not affect all of us equally. Gun violence disproportionately affects those who reside in disadvantaged communities in American cities. So scholars in criminology have examined various physical features of impoverished and underserved neighborhoods to ascertain what types of institutions, or what's sometimes called physical features of place, that tend to attract gun violence. Things like schools and bars and liquor stores and transit stops, for example. But one retail establishment that has deservedly received attention in recent years are the stores that sell firearms. That is, the locations of federal firearm licensees. Studley and colleagues report that gun shop prevalence in urban areas is associated with increased rates of homicides and robberies, and that these effects are more pronounced in neighborhoods characterized by, significant residential instability. So those authors showed that gun shop prevalence, both at the tract level and in 89 metro areas within the United States, was significantly associated with violent crime. And some more recent studies by colleagues and I have extended some of this work to examine whether gun stores have a more localized effect on gun violence in the immediate vicinity of establishments. So both in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Columbus, Ohio, we find that gun stores are strong and significant attractors of shootings, but only in neighborhoods with disadvantage levels below the mean of the city. So what we would call relatively more disadvantaged neighborhoods in the city. Given the consistency of these findings, using multiple types of methodologies in different cities and at different time points, one might be really tempted to infer a causal relationship between gun stores and gun violence. But these patterns really only illustrate a correlation between the locations of gun stores and where shootings happen in cities. It's not necessarily the case that the presence of gun stores, which might be expected, for example, to increase the availability of firearms in the local community, actually causes elevated levels of gun violence at the local level. So quantitative scholars who are unable to incorporate sort of true experimental designs often look to quasi-experimental designs as a means of establishing causality. And there are a number of ways to accomplish this, including pre-post intervention studies and propensity scores, for example. So in the former case, scholars could treat the opening of a gun store as an intervention and compare local levels of violence during a period of time before the store opened to the local levels of violence in the period after the store opened. By contrast, scholars who use propensity scores often match tracks or block groups on relevant criteria, where the only distinguishing feature between the tracks that are matched is the presence or absence of a gun store. So here we're basically artificially creating a control group to serve as the counterfactual. And then if tracks or block groups with gun stores have significantly more gun violence than a matched sample without those establishments, we might suspect or infer some degree of causality in the relationship. But in this study, we're taking a different approach. We're using a different kind of quasi-experimental design. And here we compare the locations of existing and operating federally licensed firearm dealers on contemporaneous levels of firearm violence. And we compare that to the effects of gun stores that have closed in the city. So what we're calling ghost gun stores, which theoretically should have no effect on current local levels of gun violence. So we're going to begin with two hypotheses. The first is that if an attractive effect of gun stores on shootings in disadvantaged neighborhoods is generalizable across a wide range of urban areas, then we'll find attractive effects of gun stores on shootings in each city that we study here. Again, this is just, do we replicate in this study the findings we found in previous cities? And our second hypothesis is if an attractive effect of gun stores on shootings in disadvantaged neighborhoods is causal, then the locations of ghost gun stores should really fail to attract shootings in the way that active gun stores do not. So we collected, cleaned, and geocoded shooting data in 2019, 20, and 21 from 4 major US cities: Dallas, Texas, Atlantic City, New Jersey, Los Angeles, California, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. LA, Dallas, and Philly, of course, all appear in the top 10 of the most densely populated cities in the United States. And we included Atlantic City in our analysis because it was, important to consider the New Jersey context. But New Jersey's largest cities tend to limit gun store presence to few or none by local ordinance. So it's really hard to find cities that have a large distribution of gun stores, which is a good thing. While we've completed data collection for all 4 cities, we've really only completed the analyses for 2 of those cities, Dallas and Atlantic City. So those are what I'm going to be presenting in a moment. Most of the data on gun violence for this study were culled from open data sources, with the exception of Atlantic City. So in Atlantic City, after I received approval from the chief of police to access their data, I was given access to the locations of all shootings and all calls to service of shots fired between 2019 and 2021. To determine the locations of licit gun stores with federal firearms licenses, we collected monthly online data from the ATF, which lists all of their licensees. First, we selected those gun stores that existed and were operating between 2019 and 2021 for analysis. So these are our active gun stores. And then we worked backward in time from December 2018 to January 2014 to isolate a list of what we're calling ghost gun stores that were open and operating sometime prior to 2019, but had closed by January 1st, 2019. So these are the footprints of former gun stores, right? The addresses of existing and ghost gun stores, as well as the shootings, were then geocoded in R for each city. This can be very technical, so I'm not going to explain it hopefully in a too technical a way, but I'm happy to answer questions about it after if you wish. What we use for this analysis are street network models, which estimate the distance between physical features of place, so in this case, gun stores, and shootings, right, constrained along street networks. So this provides really a much more naturalistic rendering of how human beings actually use city spaces based on sort of the shortest travel or path distances between features, gun stores, and events like shootings. To statistically assess whether gun stores attract, repel, or have no influence on the distribution of violence incidents, gun violence incidents, we estimate a network cross-K function. So this method is a stochastic point process modeling strategy used to identify spatial interdependence between what are considered deterministic points, gun stores, which have a very specific known location in each city, and stochastic points, which are in this case shootings, which could theoretically appear anywhere on the street network when both those sets of points are constrained to that street network. So the network cross-K function tests the complete spatial randomness hypothesis, the CSR hypothesis, which proposes that shootings are independently distributed over the street network in a random fashion. And it does this by simulating numerous times with a Monte Carlo simulation, patterns of shootings across the street network that would suggest spatial randomness. So we use 50 Monte Carlo simulations and determine a simulated expected distribution of shootings, which we then compare against the observed distribution of shootings along the street network. So this method effectively allows us to determine whether shootings cluster around gun stores more or less than would be expected under the hypothesis of complete spatial randomness, when obviously the accumulated number of observed shooting events at a specific distance from gun stores is significantly greater than the accumulated number of shooting incidents in a random distribution at the same distance. I know that's a heavy sentence. The observed shootings are said to be attracted to gun stores. Again, happy to talk more about that after if you wish. But before reviewing those results, I want to share with you some descriptive statistics. So we divided cities rather crudely into two categories: those neighborhoods that are above the mean on an index of disadvantage and those neighborhoods that are below the mean. And I'll note that we ran sensitivity analyses to determine whether alternative cutoff points were more appropriate. And we found that the results were largely identical. So we stuck with the mean comparison. Between 2019 and 2021, Dallas registered 4,441 shootings, roughly evenly split between neighborhoods that were more advantaged in Dallas and neighborhoods that were more disadvantaged. And Atlantic City only registered 303 shootings. But again, I'll note that this is a more expansive definition in Atlantic City, which includes both shootings and calls for service on shots fired. Dallas, as you can see, has some major differences from Atlantic City in the number of gun stores. So there are 172 federally licensed gun dealers open and operating between 2019 and 2021 in Dallas, whereas in Atlantic City there were 3. And when we look at ghost gun stores, so those gun stores that had closed sometime between 2014 and 2019, we find 57 ghost stores in Dallas and 0 in Atlantic City. So these are very, very different cases. So the results for the entire city of Dallas show that gun stores significantly attract shootings from about 250 feet from each gun store through 3,000 feet along those street networks in cities. This is shown by this blue line. So the blue line significantly exceeds the confidence interval for the estimate of complete spatial randomness at each foot distance from those stores from 250 feet onward. This is a very, actually, quite strong pattern. And you see the same pattern is true when we look at the footprints of previously operating gun stores. Even though these now ghost stores ostensibly should have no attractive effect on shootings, right? They no longer provide those opportunities for robbery or elevate the availability of weapons in the local community. When we compare between disadvantaged and advantaged neighborhoods, we'll look first at disadvantaged communities and in Dallas, and we find that both existing and ghost gun stores attract shootings in a very, very localized way. Again, very strong findings. That is, within 3,000 feet on this network, you're seeing shootings significantly attracted to both existing gun stores, active gun stores, and ghost gun stores. The pattern is very different when we look at advantaged neighborhoods. So neither existing nor ghost gun stores strongly attract gun violence in the more advantaged neighborhoods. Again, this is just the top half of neighborhoods in terms of advantage in Dallas. So you can see that the effects here are much, much weaker. Very briefly, I'll show you Atlantic City. The findings here are much less stable, so I want to be very cautious in interpreting these results. We had to use actually 200 Monte Carlo simulations to even get the analyses to run, because as you might recall, there are only 3 existing gun stores in Atlantic City. These are shown on as the 3 red dots on that map. And here we find very little support for the attractive effects of gun stores on Atlantic City shootings and shots fired until about 1,800 feet. You can see this in the middle figure, until about 1,800 feet from the gun stores. Again, I'm reluctant to put much stock into the Atlantic City findings, but we do tend to see the same pattern of effects that we've seen in other places emerging in Atlantic City, in that the attractive effects of gun stores on shootings are somewhat stronger in the more disadvantaged neighborhoods. You can see this in the top right figure on your screen, than they are in the more advantaged neighborhoods, which are on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So where does this leave us? Well, preliminary findings from this study support our first hypothesis and really confirm earlier research in that we're seeing strong attractive effects of gun stores on shootings. But this effect is driven largely by the attractive effects of gun stores on gun violence in disadvantaged neighborhoods only. We did see the same results in Atlantic City. They were weaker, but they were still present. So this suggests that gun stores act as an attractor of gun violence in disadvantaged areas, though the effect could be due to a host of things, right? It could be due to increased opportunities for crime, to increased availability of weapons, or it could technically be entirely spurious. So to test that causal relationship between gun stores and shootings, we used that quasi-experimental design described earlier to determine whether the footprints of past gun stores influence the distribution of gun violence in cities. We contend that if existing gun stores attract gun violence in disadvantaged neighborhoods, and they do, but ghost gun stores do not, then the possibility of a causal relationship between the location of gun stores and shootings would receive support. Our findings do not support this contention. Rather, the footprints of past gun stores, our ghost stores, exert as strong an attractive effect on gun violence, on shootings in cities, as do existing active stores. So these results suggest that we really need to account for potential endogeneity effects. That is, perhaps gun retailers, like other retailers, go where the customers are. And in that case, sort of paradoxically, shootings could actually be attracting the siting of gun stores. Moreover, land use and zoning decisions in cities may limit the types of places in which gun dealers can operate. So our next steps will include a really close examination of the local zoning regulations to determine how siting decisions are made. And alternatively, it's possible that other draws in these neighborhoods explain the siting of shootings and the siting of gun stores and shootings themselves. Ultimately, the findings from Atlantic City, though, suggest that New Jersey communities are well served by limiting or excluding gun dealers from their city's communities, especially those communities that are more economically deprived. So in conclusion, I'd like to stress the preliminary nature of our findings as we're sort of moving on now to examine Los Angeles and Philadelphia. We'll look to see if we can replicate the patterns that we saw in Dallas and Atlantic City elsewhere. That's sort of where we're going next. So thank you very much for your time today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about this research. Okay. Yes. Yes. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we were, we were really interested in including Philly, was in part because when you drive down the street in Atlantic City, and as you're driving down the highway and you see all the signs for gun show, gun store, and really all of those are in Philly. So I'm really excited to see what those results look like. But I mean, New Jersey, we wanted to include New Jersey because this is funded by the New Jersey Gun Violence Research Center. And it was just really hard to find a New Jersey site that made sense given how restrictive our gun policies are in New Jersey. straw purchasers. Yeah, Frank, you make another excellent point, and that relates to illicit versus illicit sales. So this is something that my colleagues and I have thought a lot about, and there's no question that crime guns, guns used in violent incidents, often are not legitimately purchased by the person who ends up using the gun. So most guns that are recovered from crime scenes are illegal in some way. They're either ghost guns or they are straw purchased, or they've had the serial number filed off. And so a lot of times my colleagues and I are hearing, but then why does it matter where gun stores are located? And our argument would be that the vast majority of the guns that exist were at one time at least purchased in through a federally licensed firearm dealer. And so these operate at least as, starting points in the chain. And so they may have an impact. And the fact that we find an impact so frequently and so strongly in every city that we've looked at, besides Atlantic City, it really suggests that there is something going on there, even if those particular guns that are being circulated in those communities aren't the ones that are ending up in the crime events. I think that I've taken up all of your time. So if you, I would love to hear from any of you who are interested in this work. Please just shoot me an email, and thank you very much for joining me.